welcome to Paperback Flick.
Welcome back, everybody. We are going over To Kill a Mockingbird this time. So I actually finished reading it like a while ago, and then I took a while to find the movie. So I just barely watched the movie like yesterday.
Okay.
So
Yeah. So I watched like last week. So yeah.
okay.
So a little fresher in your mind than mine, but
Yeah.
so yeah.
Well,
You want to start this?
yeah, so I was gonna start with the book. So I have read the book many times.
Okay.
Um Mostly for school, but then also in school they like jump around and they'll skip certain parts, or depending on the teacher they'll want you to like focus on like a particular element or whatever. And so I had never just read it straight through for myself before.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a bunch of stuff that I noticed in the book that I had never read before. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Uh-huh.
things that maybe I was just young and immature, or maybe they just always skipped it. But have you read the book before
I
this?
remember reading it. I want to say sixth grade. Sometime it felt like it was in grade school, but I remembered things that weren't in the book that like. So I'm now confused. There's one thing that I remember happening between Scout and the teacher. Apparently, isn't in this book. So like this must be a different book, but it's almost exactly like these characters in this setting. So now I'm like super confused. Where was this from? Anyways, but I remembered it being from To Kill a Mockingbird, and it's not. But
So what? So
I
what
don't.
is it? Because she does have interactions with the teacher that's like a kind of a negative.
Yeah, she does. It in the thing I was remembering is where she like cursed her with the dropsies. So she kept dropping things like after they had a bad impression or something. She like, sort of like mentally cursed her. She'd just keep being fumbling and dropping things. And like the rest of the class, she just kept dropping things. And I remember thinking it was Liz because I've had plenty of teachers that I did not care for.
Right.
Probably more teachers I didn't like than teachers I did. So now I have to figure out what flipping book it was because it was very similar to these characters and how they interacted. And like, I swear it had the same kind of feel like a Southern school or something. And I'm like, great, now it's gonna drive me crazy. Trying to figure out where that came from. But I just one it was from To Kill a Mockingbird, but it's not.
Nope, it's not.
And the
But yeah, she.
connections I didn't remember.
Oh yeah,
And like, but it's been a long time. So it was good to read it again.
hmm
And yeah, it was very interesting.
yeah. So there's a lot of verbiage that like it's actually kind of normal to be like things like scuppernongs. They're grapes, in
Oh.
case people were reading the book and didn't know. But they'll talk about how like Jem like kept stealing, I think it was Miss Rachel's scuppernong, somebody's, or maybe it was Stephanie Crawford's, but he kept eating her scuppernongs. They're a type of grape, and they
Okay.
they grow in like the South or whatever. But like I'd heard that word before, and I knew what they were, but like I just forgot that it was in there. There's so many things that are like part of the vernacular of the book that I either had forgotten about or never knew. I kept looking up phrases and trying to like I get the general, based on context, I could tell what they were saying,
Mm-hmm.
but I kind of I didn't know the exact like that particular expression or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it kind of changes your understanding of the story a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But and then there were other things like their druthers, if he got his druthers, meaning like if he'd gotten what he would rather.
Oh, okay.
That's
Yeah.
what the getting your druthers are. Like things like that I'm like, oh my gosh, I grew up with terms like that, but I haven't heard them in 30 years. But so yeah, for me it was partially a little bit of a nostalgic, like,
Yeah, from your time in Missouri.
yeah, yep. So that's the Ozarks. It's not quite the deep South, but there's a little bit of carryover.
Mm-hmm.
But so I kind of wanted to, because you've been in Utah, you've been in New York, Texas, like you've been in a lot of places, but have you spent time in the South?
Not really. Like I've driven through it a few times now,
Yeah.
visiting different people, but I haven't actually lived in the South. So, but I feel like the funny thing about reading this, again, I'm doing book on tape. That's the only way I'll end up doing it.
Hmm.
Um, I've just converted myself to that. And the funny thing about listening to a book on tape, it was so hard not to just go around talking like them afterwards. And I'm like, I pride myself on not having a Utah accent and not really not having a very strong one anyways,
Hmm.
and not having a twang for the most part. And the only time I do is when I'm making fun of people who do. So like, or not making fun, when I'm mimicking,
I get what you
when I'm copying. Um, but I had the hardest time like going around just copying the way they talk. And so I just started doing it, and my husband was just cracking up. It was killing him. It's just not how I talk usually.
like I said, I grew up in the Ozarks, and there is kind of a, I guess, twang. There's kind of a almost a lilt to the
Mhm.
way people talk, and a drawl. It's like a drawl, I guess.
Yeah.
But and it is really slow, and it has kind of that kind of southern, but not deep south. Like it's not like molasses,
Hmm.
but anyway, but yeah, as I was reading this, yeah, I started to do that because if I hear like, even if people have like a thick accent from wherever, I start to pick it up. I start to like, I'm not insulting you. I just, that's the way you're talking. And so it's the way my brain starts
Oh,
thinking.
this is different, interesting, and like you're sort of dissecting it. And like, oh, how would you make that sound? And
Right. Yeah. And so, and so like, as I'm like talking to my kid, I'm like reading and then I'm like, put that away or whatever. And like, Scott's like, I can hear it. I can hear it coming out. You dropped all your G's all of a sudden. It's a mockingbird. Like he's like, you always do that whenever I get tired or angry, apparently.
mm,
He's like, you either sound like you're a little bit Scottish or Irish or something if you're angry, or you sound like you're from the Ozarks if you're tired. And apparently I've been doing that a lot lately. I'm like, well,
the roots are just coming on out.
right. But yeah, it is kind of fun to look into the southern, like growing up in this like small town neighborhood where you knew everybody on your street and
Hmm.
and the, like I said, like the either the terms or the just the way that people speak that is just so like nostalgic, even if it's maybe not from your childhood, you feel like it's nostalgic. You know what I mean?
One of the things that I wanted to mention is so I've always believed that the word Negro was more of like the common, like general term or it was the acceptable word. But
Mm-hmm.
like in the book, they use the N word like it's a normal word. Like
Right.
it's not an offensive word on a regular basis unless you use it a certain way. So like if they said N lover, then it was like, oh, she didn't know what Scout didn't know what it meant, but she
Right.
know by how it was said that it was an
Right.
insult.
Right.
What I found very interesting about that is like when you grow up with the N word, we're just gonna call it that,
Mm-hmm.
as an offensive word, when you first start reading it, it's kind of like, whoa, they say this word a lot. So
Mm-hmm.
like I was prepared to hear Negro and not be bothered by it. 'Cause I always heard that as just kind of like saying Caucasian almost. Um, like it was just a classification, not a negative word.
Right.
Then I'm listening to this, I'm like, they're just saying the N-word like it's no big deal. And it's like it's so much in the book. And I'm like, I do not remember reading it with that many N-words in it before. I knew there were a couple, but like I
Mm-hmm.
wonder if the version I read, if my school had like a clean flicks
Right.
version of Kill A Mockingbird, and I read a cleaner version that didn't have as many or didn't have the N word in it.
So
Because
I wondered that too.
yeah,
Because so the book that I just read is from the Folio Society.
okay.
I don't have it super close to me. I can go grab it, but it's like the hardbound, has like the embossed and like textured cover, and it's all fancy and nice, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it is original text. Like
Okay. Yeah.
if there's a mistake or a misprint or whatever, like it's the original, like,
Okay.
okay.
Yeah.
In school, there's like another more common book that has like, it's a paperback, and it has like a picture on it of like the tree, and I think it's Scout under the tree and like a little bird or something.
Yeah.
But it's considerably thinner.
Huh.
And so I don't know, but I wonder if maybe there is kind of an abridged version or a modified version.
To children
Right.
in school,
Because,
where I come from, growing up in Utah, they're
right.
not going to be teaching a book with a whole lot of offensive terms in it.
I was in Utah when I read it at least twice. I can think of 3 times that I read it for school, and twice it was in Utah.
Yeah.
So maybe
it's possible. I guess I never thought about there being a different version than like the original version and what they taught us.
right.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that what I read or what I listened to was the original version because it was very unapologetic and it was everywhere. It was narrated by Sissy Spacek.
Oh,
She was very good, by the way. I was like, oh, I am super impressed. I thought she was a pretty good actress, but now I'm like, whoa, you're amazing.
yeah.
She did great. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that the version that I listened to is the original because the amount of extra themes that I don't remember and the amount of N words.
Yeah.
Just like, but what I thought was interesting, just stepping real quick to the movie, they say the N word once when Scout tells Atticus that someone called her an N lover, and he goes, "Oh, don't use that word, Scout." And I was
Call them
like,
Negroes. Yeah.
what was funny is I'm like, okay, so the book is written in like the time frame is like the
The
1930s
30s. Yeah.
before World War II.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then the movie was released in like the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
The book came out in 1960, and then the movie, I think it's like 1967. Even though it was considered completely normal to use that word in the time frame the book was written, they changed it for the time frame the movie was released.
Right. Does he say that in the book? I was thinking that he says that in the book too. Don't call him that, or don't use that word or something. Like he says something about, maybe it was the term, the lover, like maybe that was what he was saying. But at some point he's like, don't use crass language. And then she starts getting into like trying to use her,
trying to swear, talking about, the D word and the hey.
right.
I don't remember from reading any point where they said saying the N word was a bad thing.
Right.
Just calling someone an N lover. And she even said she didn't know what that meant. She just knew that it was bad by how they said it. Very interesting that they like changed it to fit within modern ideals or understandings. Funny to me because reminded me of how nowadays they try to put modern day ideals into old text. Like even their sort of like their governess slash maid, housekeeper lady, Calpurnia was using that word.
Right.
Like it was no big deal, and the other Black characters were using that word, but not just to other Black people, but to the white kids and the other people they worked with. So it wasn't just like white people saying it to the white people, it was Black people saying it to white people. So it was like, it wasn't considered a bad word.
Right.
So like, it makes me wonder at what point it became considered a bad word.
I believe that it was the civil rights movement that kind of made that, like, that's a terminology from the past. It is a carryover from slavery, specifically to denote slaves, Black slaves. And I think that that's why it is so taboo now. But like you, I mean, I grew up in the Ozarks. I did not grow up with that word.
Yeah.
Like as much as people are like, I don't know, people nowadays will get very offended. I have heard it so much more now in the last like 5 to 10 years than I ever heard it growing up, ever. And when I did, it was in like rap songs, like, like like it was not used in a negative context, or if it was like Black people using it
Yeah,
towards each
them
other.
using it amongst themselves. Yeah.
And so I'm like I did not realize that it was just such a common thing until people started making a big deal about it. And I had to do a little research, like, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
I'm like, that was just not my experience, even in a place that is kind of known for being backwatery and, like 20 years behind everybody else. And
It wasn't that backwatery when you were there. It was more front watery.
I mean, headwaters. There are a lot of, like, all through the book, it kind of deals with prejudice, like different prejudices.
Yeah.
And all of the others, I did, like, I could think back, sometimes not even that far back, and I could like the prejudices, they didn't touch on it a lot, but the boys against girls prejudices, there's a little bit of that in there because that's natural. The old lady, what's her name? Ms. Du Bois.
Bose? Yeah, the Bose.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, she was horrible.
She
And
was awful.
that was okay. So sorry. Certain things I could not. Okay, I'm a West Coaster, I guess. Not West Coaster exactly. I'm a Wester, whatever.
Right.
And like I don't consider myself North or South or whatnot, but like I don't think I could handle being in Southern society as a child, especially in those days. I could not put up with people talking smack about me, let alone my father, my brother, my family. I wouldn't put up with that stuff, and I would do far worse than destroy someone's flowers if they talk that way about my family. There's no way I wouldn't cuss the woman out to her face, and I try not to swear. So like you just don't do that. But
Right.
like then their dad's like, oh, you can't, get upset at old ladies, old sick ladies, and like you just the culture is so different where like
Yeah.
you were demanded, you had to respect your elders even
Right.
if they didn't flip and deserve it, even if they were absolute jerks and they had no manners whatsoever, even if they acted like children. You were supposed to respect them because they're your elders, and you
Right.
were supposed to just stand there and take it. And I'm like, I would
See,
be horrible that time. I had so much trouble.
I did grow up with a little bit of that. And a lot of times it was like, in the moment, it was grin and bear it. Like, deal with this, have a little class. And then when we went home, and I was like, that, oh, and my mom would have to, calm me down and explain to me, I understand. Because she would always be like, there are days that I think you are ridiculous. Also, you're 8 years old, and I have to remember that in your 8-year-old mind, you're not being ridiculous. And she's like, there are probably days that you think I am being the most horrible mother in the world. But when you are a mother, you will probably think the same way I'm thinking now, and she's like, I don't know what's going on in that old guy's head. Like, she's like, I don't know, but I do know that us acting out is just going to make it worse. And so that was kind of the takeaway that I always had. But yeah, I knew a few of those people, a few Ms. DeBose types.
Yeah. I mean,
But
Atticus, like, everybody always acts like Atticus is a horrible father. I'm like, I'm sorry, Atticus is the best father here. He's the best parent in town.
it's
And
so
I'm like,
funny.
wow.
So when people play, like, you play the stupid games where you're like, who's your celebrity crush, or who's your um fictional character, or whatever. And I was like, I don't have a crush on Atticus, but I 100% want to marry an Atticus Finch. Like, there's not a better man. He's not swoony. He's not the one that you're like, oh my gosh, but he is the one that I
He's
want coming
daddy
home to my
material.
house. I want him raising my kids.
That's daddy material right there. I
Yep.
mean, took on raising 2 children by himself. He does it wonderfully. He respects who they are, people, but he still tries to raise them with good manners and to teach them to respect people. He respects everyone around him. At the
Yep.
same time, he like puts up with all sorts of crap, and he sets an example that is just stellar.
Mm-hmm.
And I do love all the different ways in which a lot of the story is Atticus.
Mm-hmm.
The
Yeah.
fact that it's written from Scout's perspective and a lot of it spent in the children's, level. A lot of it is Atticus. Atticus
Right.
tells the story. He
Yep.
makes the story. If it weren't for his character, almost all the grown-ups would be reprehensible. Besides Calpurnia. Calpurnia was fantastic.
Well, and Miss Maudie seemed to be kind of the stable base
Yeah,
a
she's
lot of
kind
the
of
time.
in between.
Yeah.
She's kind of like everybody else, but she's not.
He gets a lot of the best lines, all because he's the one teaching. And so a lot of like the To Kill a Mockingbird is a sin. Like that's an Atticus line.
Yeah.
To kill a song, they don't do anything. They don't get into your corn crib. They don't
Yeah.
yeah, they do is make beautiful music for you. It's a sin to kill them. And then that's later reflected with Tom Robinson and his wife, and it's later reflected with Boo Radley.
Mm-hmm.
So I remembered the Boo Radley stuff, like the obsession with Boo Radley, and the case, the Tom Robinson case.
Mm-hmm.
But that was all that I ever remembered. We must have skipped over all the other stuff. And I kind of like that they had the other stuff in there. I appreciated the lessons learned from those other interactions.
Mm-hmm.
That I feel like if you're going for the main theme, get the legal case, because that is kind of the crux of the story overall.
Mm-hmm.
And get the Boo Radley story, because that's the crux of Scout's story. Like, I understand that, but it almost feels like throwing away good story to throw out any of the rest of it. I understand, like, when they're making the movie, I understand that they had to make some choices. What parts are we going to take? What parts are redundant, maybe, I understand it, but I'm kind of sad to have to lose any of it.
Yeah. It's a really well-written book, and
Mhm.
that's the thing that's just so interesting about it is it's very raw. It's very vernacular, and but it's very innocent yet very sinister, and it's dark and it's very interesting. And but yeah, as far as like things that they changed, I noticed that they sort of made their aunt and Miss Maudie one person for the movie.
Yep.
And I can see the reasons for that, but I feel like there are interesting things about the aunt and Scout's relationship with the aunt.
Right.
And how it changes from when they just go visit the aunt to they just see the aunt to when the aunt comes to live with them and has to actually live in their world and see what Atticus is actually dealing with. And like even it's to a point, I love at the end of the book when so the whole time the aunt is Atticus' sister complaining about how she doesn't wear a dress and how she shouldn't be wearing breeches and blah 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 blah. And like totally after about becoming a lady and being a part of the society. And at the end, after the whole incident with
Bob Yule.
with what?
Bob Yule.
Bob Yule, thank you. So I'm like, I forgot his name. Oh. Bob Yule, and losing her costume and not having her dress, and she just has like her underclothes, whatever on. Like, and she rushes back to follow Boo Radley to carry his gem back to the house. And then it talked about how the aunt went to let her some clothes to put on, and she brought her overalls. Like, even the scout says, like, if it had been some other time, I would have pointed it out, but I didn't.
Right.
Because it was sort of like, it was at a moment where the aunt's like, she's so more involved in what they're doing and what's actually going on and caring about what's really happening to worry about heckling her right now about wearing a dress or trying to force her to wear a dress. So it's almost like sort of symbolic that she's starting to accept Scout now as a person.
Right.
And to accept them as a family. Like
yeah. Well, and it's to me, I forget if I think it was with the mission ladies, like whatever their group was called.
Yeah.
But like you see, like the aunt kind of has this transition where she's like, she came in to teach Scout how to be a young lady, because clearly this house full of men is not doing it. And Calpurnia, great. She's great for what she is.
Yeah, but she's not
But she's not a
proper
lady,
white
right?
Southern lady. Yeah.
Right. And so, and honestly, I'm not totally against that, because that was her way of being good to Scout. Like she was doing it for goodness. But then as you like see her through the different interactions, especially with the other ladies, and how Scout deals with, or how they interact with Scout, like you watch the aunt kind of change a little bit. She sees that Scout is being respectful to me, just not in the way that I was expecting.
Yeah.
She is trying to be a good person and grow into a good woman. Maybe I can give her overalls, because right now it's not important that she wear a dress. You know what I mean? Like by the end, from Scout's perspective, haha, aunt, you weren't paying attention. But from the aunt's perspective, maybe she was. Like, you know, she had come to a point that she can accept that Scout's going to wear overalls, but she's also going to pour the coffee at the mission tea thing. Like, you know, like
maybe she's thinking, hey, you almost died. Worrying about whether or not you wear a dress is kind of stupid.
right. Yeah. Like they both
I'm just glad that you're alive and I can put clothes on you.
Right. They both kind of learn to respect each other without realizing that that's what they're doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I like that. Yeah, I do like that part where again they're the whole mission thing, and they're having a little conversation with the refreshments and everything. And then Atticus comes in and asks them to come to the kitchen and tells them that Tom's been killed. And how like Scout takes kind of her cues from the aunt, how the aunt was very shaken and very like, oh my gosh. And then she's able to kind of like pull together and put on a smile, but like, I gotta go talk to my guest. And like Scout like thinks, oh well, if my aunt can pull it together and go and be gracious and kind to them after what just happened, I can, you know, serve coffee. I can go help.
Right.
Do this too.
And they're being gracious and kind too. So this is something that I never would have clued into it. Or if maybe I didn't even read it before, but how the woman, I don't remember what her name is, but she's at this little society gathering, and she's talking about I think they call it the Muras. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but it's a fake tribe that Harper Lee made up, an African tribe. The what?
Yeah, I remember you talking about
it. And
you know, that's, you know, saving these people.
Right. This reverend who went into the deep jungles of Africa to save this tribe of heathens.
There's no sense of family.
Yeah, and
every child has several fathers and several mothers, and it's like, I think they do have a sense of family. It's just a different sense than you have.
Right. But, and how she was, how that same woman who was like, these poor people, we have to save them all. And then she would turn around and be like, well, you know, Tom spoke out against a white man, so he kind of had what was coming. They always run, you know, like just kind of throwing his life away, throwing his death away, you know, like the same woman that's like, oh no, these poor souls in Africa, is such a hypocrite that she doesn't even realize that here are these good Christian people that happen to be Black, and you therefore treat them as less than. You know, clean up your own house before you try to. And yet the aunt was just as gracious to them as she was to Miss Maudie, who like Scout even mentions at the end of that interaction, at one of the interactions there, she sees the aunt give like a look of gratitude to Maudie for kind of stepping in and
talking about Atticus or saying something appropriate in front of Scout.
Right.
Thank you. It says, they should have the manners not to say something like that in front of the child.
Right.
But that was one of the things that I noticed a lot in the book is there's a lot of sense of there's what's proper and like good behavior and good manners, but there's a huge hypocrisy between what the parents say and the adults say and what they do.
Yep.
And they talk about, oh, this and this and that, but then like they flip completely when it comes to a different scenario.
I could talk about the book forever. I don't know how much we want to focus on the little individual things in the book, but I do kind of want to address, like I had mentioned before, that the movie, I understand that they have to kind of cut some things out. Like they can't put everything that's in the book into one movie. I wish so very much that, well, there's a couple things that I wish had been put in, but the fire scene. So in the book, Maudie's house catches on fire. They send the kids down in front of the Radley place because it's far enough away from the fire to be safe. And then she's cold, Scout's cold, and she's kind of like huddled against Jem for a little while. And then at some point she is no longer, and she doesn't really think about it until she gets home. And her dad was like, oh, you should probably give that blanket back. And she's like, blanket? Like,
well, you don't know.
But she doesn't even realize that someone who had come out and put a blanket on her. And then at the very end of the book, so I keep messing with my hair, sorry. But at the very end of the book, she has walked him home and she's standing on his porch. And like I got weirdly emotional. Like I cried when I read this, okay?
Yeah.
People who know me know that I actually get like, I think having kids messed me up because I get easily emotional these days about certain things. Like some things I can talk about forever and I'm fine.
I'm pretty sure that does to everybody. Like I know I didn't cry over half as many things before I had kids.
Yes. But yeah, but so she's standing on his porch and she sees the window and she turns around and she thinks back and she's like, a man is watching these children play in the streets and watching these children run to their father at the as he comes home, and watching them put on a little play in the yard, and watching the dog get shot, and like whatever, like he's watching everything. And then at one point it says and then his children needed him.
Yeah.
And kind of that was what like so touching to me, the concept that like she understood like he had grown to really care for them. And that's something that was always missing when you're going through the like Cliff's Notes version trying to get the grade.
Yeah.
But it I don't know, like I was like, I wish that the movie was able to include those two things. Like the first specific time that you see him care for that, not just because like when he leaves the gifts in the tree, that could easily just be like perhaps a handicapped person that hasn't mentally developed beyond a 12-year-old. Like maybe that's like you can kind of see that he doesn't know what else to do, but here's some kids and I'm going to leave some gum in the tree because kids like. But then when you see as the story develops and you see that like she realizes like this is a man who is socially inept almost, but he genuinely cared for these kids. He wasn't just a child mind, he was like, my children are cold, go put a blanket. My children need help. The children that I am caring for in the way that I can. Like, I'm like, I wish that was in the movie because it's so beautiful.
It is. It really is. One of the other things that I wish was in there is, besides the whole thing with the aunt and that whole background, I thought that was very interesting. I also wish they had talked about how Bob Yule had attacked Tom's wife, harassed her, and how he had like apparently tried to had tried to break into the judge's house
Mm-hmm.
and like how he had threatened Atticus. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing leading up to that attack. I mean, there's like one thing, like he comes by um Tom's house when they go and tell his wife that he was dead. And he was there the first time they went out there to see him, whatever. But like he's a menacing person in the movie, but not in the same sense that he is in the book,
Mm-hmm.
where like there's all these little things leading up to the eventual attack.
Right.
And so it's more of like, part of you is like at first when you're reading it, if you didn't know what was going to happen, you would be like, who's following them? And then as it goes on, you'd be like, oh, wait, is it him? And because it's been sort of talked about, oh, he's going to do something, he's going to do something. And you assume that it's going to be the Atticus, not that it's going to be the kids. And so, like, it becomes really, it's terrifying reading that, going, oh my gosh, this grown man is going to take out his anger on these children.
Right.
And you're like, they're by themselves. And like the way they describe it in the book, when they're walking back to the school, it makes it feel like this really big field, like this huge dark space. And it was a little different in the movie. They made it seem like they were walking through woods, which would also
Right.
be scary, but it didn't have the same kind of feel. Um, but essentially, they have this big space in which anything can happen.
Mm-hmm.
And they're completely, they don't have flashlight. They're just walking in the dark. They're just kind of feeling their way through. And it's terrifying. And like I could find myself being that little girl in that situation. It took me back to being that little kid wandering around by herself and that fear. And at least she had Jim with her, but she's like almost completely blind in this costume. She
Mm-hmm.
can't see what's happening. She doesn't know what's going on. That would be terrifying to have somebody attack you, to hear
Yeah.
somebody attacking your brother, to be like, have someone trying to, squeeze you to death. And like the whole thing,
Yeah.
absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. Well, and they even mention when they bring in her costume after the whole thing is done, like that you can see where the knife actually broke through the chicken wire.
Uh-huh.
Like
He tried to kill her.
tried to kill her. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of those things that again, like somehow I never caught on to that before. Because they don't say like where he obviously stabbed her. Like it's just like she could see where there was a sharp cut in the chicken wire, or whatever it says there.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh my gosh, like this was for real.
Yeah. I remember them being attacked, but I don't remember there being a knife involved. And
Yeah.
I think there's a lot that I just didn't remember. So I guess it's a good thing to go back and reread the books that you read as a kid because they might be very different than you remember them being.
Yeah.
This was in a lot of ways a much better book than I remember it being, and a lot more to it. And
Yeah.
it's probably possible that we had the abridged, cleaned version.
I think there has to be something like that because I legitimately don't remember large parts of the book. And I can't remember what her name was. So at junior high, out in the trailers, one of the English teachers who I loved, I keep moving my hands the way that she used to move her hand. And she made her G's like the circle and then the drag down and the second circle. Can't remember her name. She's one of my favorite teachers, but I don't know.
Sorry. I can help
Lady
you.
that I liked having
I
a
didn't
teacher.
have a favorite English teacher until high school, so
But she when we were doing To Kill a Mockingbird in that class, like she was like, I'm going to be assigning specific pages or sometimes maybe a chapter here and there. She's like, I suggest that you guys read through the whole thing. You will get so much more out of it. And I remember being like, I could do that or I could not and still get a good grade. So,
yeah.
you know,
And that's funny. And then maybe that's what I got too. Like this when I read through a whole book. So maybe I got like the clean version. But yeah, like that would explain how they would teach the book without having all of that in there.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but and then I remember I saw the movie and sometimes you can't, like, as we know,
Mhm.
sometimes you can't depend on the movie to tell you the story. Like I
Yeah.
watched Huck Finn, so I might have mentioned this before, but I used to have a huge crush on Elijah Wood. So when they did Huck Finn, I was like, oh, cool. Like, that's a book that I also read for, I think I actually read it for history, technically, like American history, but I had read it. And so I watched the movie and I was like, huh, because there's some drastic differences. Maybe sometime we'll do that. I don't know. But there were some drastic differences. And then we've done like Ella Enchanted, where it's like loosely based off of the concepts in
a book of the same title.
yeah. And so when I saw the movie, it did tend to focus on exactly what we focused on in school. And so I thought that I was getting the complete story.
Yeah.
You know, I was getting the broad sweeps of the story, certainly. But when I actually read through the book for myself for this, I was like, wow, I liked this before. It's easily one of my favorites now. Like, that was kind of eye-opening to me. But I have to say, I saw and heard Gregory Peck all the way through reading it.
Yeah. All right. So I want to talk about Gregory Peck. Okay.
Yeah.
So here's the other thing. I'm fairly certain no one else could play this part but Gregory Peck. And I don't
agree.
know if that's because I grew up with this movie version and because it's the only movie made of it.
Yep.
I looked, I couldn't find another version of it. I found movies that were inspired by it. There are modern retellings, but not another movie to Kill a Mockingbird.
I did the
don't
same
know
thing.
if that's just because somebody's like, they did it once, let's not touch on that subject again, or if it's just because nobody else can play Atticus but Gregory Peck.
That's what I think.
So yeah, like he is a perfect casting for that character. He can play the older dad. He could do the dignity. He still got a sense that there was strength and inner turmoil behind that cool exterior. He is Atticus.
Yep.
And yeah, but like I was saying to my husband, I'm like, yeah, I just don't think you could remake this movie. I'm like, who would even be Atticus? And he's like, well, what about George Clooney? And I'm like, George Clooney's a fine actor, don't get me wrong, but I just don't think he has the same.
Yeah.
I don't know if he could do it. Like Gregory Peck.
If he could manage a little bit of a change in his accent, Richard Armitage could give it a decent go.
I don't know who that is.
Oh, yeah, you do.
What is he in?
Okay, so the in The Hobbit, the lead dwarf.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Also, I know him from, I don't remember if it's called Robin Hood or if it's called Sherwood. But it's like a British miniseries or something.
You mean the Hobbit movie?
Yeah, the Hobbit movie, the
Gnome Prince.
Oakenshield. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Goes back and gets the stone, and yeah.
Okay. All right.
So he's him.
Yeah.
But
I think I know him from.
What's that?
He was the only thing I know him from.
Maybe. I mean, I could list a few other things, but
yeah,
they might not be mainstream enough for most people to recognize them. But yeah, so he could give it a decent go. He's not Gregory Peck.
Yeah.
Like the man's voice just felt like kind of the same thing you were saying. Like you feel like an under layer of like strength and depth and emotion, as well as the tempered, I'm going to be a professional. I'm going to be cool-headed. Like he could emote, but his voice could emote enough that you understand what's happening behind the words.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that he's just one of those actors that I'm just like, yep, you're it. There's no reason to keep looking.
Yeah. I think sometimes the right actor finds the right role. The right role finds the right actor. And I think that's probably the best thing about the movie is Gregory Peck.
Yep.
So one of the interesting things I found out from doing some research is so kind of a sidestep, somewhat related. Harper Lee, the author, I knew she was good friends with Truman Capote, who was also a famous author.
Mhm.
And I didn't know enough about them, so I was kind of researching, and it turns out they grew up next door to each other in
Oh,
the same town. And the character Dill is actually based off of Capote.
I was gonna say he's her Dill.
Yeah, so like they grew up together, and then his mom moved him to New York City, and so then he would come back and visit for the summers. So he literally is Dill. So yeah, yeah. So I was like,
Did they get married?
no, Capote.
I know. That was his thing,
Dill
right?
and yeah, the Kid
Yeah, yeah.
and Scout. I don't know. I haven't read the sequel slash prequel book.
I haven't either.
Yeah,
The
so
Call a Watchman, is that what it
yeah,
is?
so
Yeah, I
called
haven't read
Watchmen
it.
or something. So the other thing, my husband and I were sort of talking about this before, and I was like, it's a sequel, and he's like, oh, I thought it was a prequel. Well, it turns out we're both right. She wrote Go Set a Watchman first, and then she decided she wanted to go back to the beginning of Scout's story and then write that story, and that was To Kill a Mockingbird, and that's the one she published.
Okay.
And they, in 2015, 2014, they released the other book,
Right.
which is when she, grown up. And I haven't read it yet, but now I feel like I have to. That's interesting knowing that. What was the other thing? Oh, but the To Kill a Mockingbird story is loosely based off of her own father, who was a lawyer, and a trial that he defended two black men who were accused of murdering a white man. And so she took a lot from very real life experiences
Mm-hmm.
and her own childhood. So it explains a lot of why it's so good and
Mm-hmm.
so well done, because it's very personal. And you can tell that, and from what I've read about her, she was a tomboy. She was the one that kept people from beating up on Truman when they were in school together. And so it sounds like in lots of ways she is Scout. Scout is
Mm-hmm.
very much her.
Right.
And I found that very interesting. But the other thing that I wanted to point out is Truman Capote was a celebrated author, and then she released one book.
Mm-hmm.
And who do we read in school? Her book. Her one
Yep.
book.
Yep.
Out of all, he had all these great successes and these great books, and we don't read Truman Capote. We
Right.
read Harper Lee. And I'm like, that's kind of cool. At the same time, I can feel for Truman. I would be like pissed, because
Mm-hmm.
I need to look it up. I don't know if he ever won a Pulitzer, but she won a Pulitzer for her first and only book that she published in her lifetime.
Yeah.
But I can see how, like, even as a best friend, being a little bit like, like, what?
So
But
I'm not an author, but and so maybe it's different. Like it's kind it's kind of like when people who don't have kids try to tell me about what I should do. I hate that. I hate it.
think that's so cute. So adorable.
Bless their little hearts, right?
No idea what you're talking about. I cannot wait till you find out how clueless you are. Yeah.
Yes. So this might be kind of that thing, but like as an avid reader, I may have read Truman Capote. I feel like I have, even though I can't think of anything right off. But I cherish more the from the heart, I have to get this out work than I maybe do the guy who's like, whoa, I'm amazing at this. Throw it out. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I know it's not exactly like that, but
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
like I know not to name drop, but when Scott and I were living in Utah, we lived across the street, well, and down a couple from Anita Stansfield. And she's a very prolific author that not very many people necessarily have heard of.
LDS fiction.
Yeah, she's an LDS author. A lot of people within that church have heard of her or have read her stuff.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily like, oh, Anita Stansfield, right? And I was talking to her years and years and years ago, and she was like, she's like, so when I first started writing, it was just a passion that I had, and I may not have been amazing at it, but it was like, I gotta write this. And then people saw that and they were like, wow, that's great. And then she got some kind of book deal or whatever. And suddenly they're like making demands, and she has to put out a new book every year. And she's like, I don't want to call my work trite. I try to never actually like cheapen the work. I try to keep it good still. But when it became a requirement that you set certain that you make certain deadlines, or we're expecting this much out of you, like it did change how she couldn't spend 4 years passionately like focusing, or she couldn't take the time to step away, remove herself, come back at it when she's fresh. And no, she had to have chapters 6 through 12 done by a certain time, or whatever it was, you know what I mean? And so she was like, yeah, she's like, I'm not ashamed of anything that I've ever done, but the things that she was able to just put what was within her onto paper, like those were the ones that she's like, even if you only ever read one thing of mine, I hope that it's one of these that I was able to give justice to. And so I kind of feel like that might be like this book, every element of it had something for you to learn. You're learning about different elements of prejudice. You're learning about a child's perception of an adult world or an adult situation. You're seeing things as an adult that like, wow, the child noticed that. And maybe in reality, she didn't notice that. Maybe she put that into her book as an adult. However, children notice, like, you know, and so all the different little things, like the concept of what was important to a child versus what was important to the adults, and just a million little things, walking around another man's skin or whatever, like, you know, all of these different things that she put passion into every different piece that she was telling you. I don't know, maybe he also did, but there comes a point that like you're shelling out so much stuff that it can't all be as amazing as your magnum opus type, you know what I mean? But this was her magnum opus. So
sometimes people just have like the one big work, and I get you're saying, like, I agree, there is something to having time to really like let something simmer and marinate and like let it really meet its potential. I feel like I got to do that with my third book, like 8 years to write it. But yeah, at the same time, there are people that are constantly producing work and putting it out. And some people, they find a way to kind of like formulate it, and they're able to like hit all these certain beats, and they're able to turn it into like being a book writing factory or something.
Right.
And some people can do that well. But I think for me, for people that write as much as a passion and as much as an art form, it's I think it requires to write it in its own time. The best way to do it is, you know, some of us have to write when we're ready to write. We have to write when we're feeling it, and we have to keep working on it as long as we feel like it needs it. So yeah, there are writers who can just push things out, but my concern is when you're doing that, that it becomes a formula and it loses its heart. Like, when I can read, I know there's a lot of books that have like, there's a winning formula that if you hit all these themes, then you've written the perfect story or whatever, or it's gonna, you know, be successful. But when you can tell that's what they're doing, then you're not doing a good job. I don't want to feel the arc too much. I want to like notice the arc of the story and how it developed, like more of an afterthought. But when I'm in reading it, I want to feel like it's all natural and it's all naturally unfolding. I don't want to feel like, well, I know this is going to happen and this is going to happen. I don't want to be, some things are going to be foreshadowed, sure. And you're going to hint of it, but I don't want to feel like it's so obvious and so formulaic that there's really no point in even reading it.
Right.
You know?
Well, I think of, so as I'm saying this, as I'm like, she focused on this one, I was thinking, I've probably mentioned this before, but I consider myself a huge Brandon Sanderson fan.
Mhm.
And I am, but I'm a fan of one particular, the Stormlight Archive, one particular series, right? And when I'm like, I'm a Sanderson fan, people are like, amazing, here's a bunch of stuff. And so they're giving me these other series, and it's great. And I have read some of them, and they're fine. But you know, kind of like I was talking about before, how like they're fine. They're not bad. I'm not like
Yeah.
wasted my time reading them, but they're not the one that I love. Like I care about those characters, you know,
Mhm.
and the other books that he has written just don't have that same hold on me, you know.
Yeah.
And I feel that's kind of how this book, like, I care about all of these I care about the Yule girl. I feel for her, like she's kind of in an impossible position. She does the wrong thing. Ultimately,
Yeah.
she is a villain of the story,
Yeah.
but she is such a victim too. And I feel for her. My heart breaks for her, and it breaks all the more because she does this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Like,
so
take
I'm like, what?
okay.
So if you can get me to feel for the bad guy, like I don't care about Bob Yule. He's a stubborn, ignorant,
Horrible person.
low down, horrible person.
Yeah.
But I feel for you because without her, he had no power.
Mhm.
Without her, none of this happened. The fact that I actually like kind of cared for the girl. It drives me crazy when people are like, sure, he murdered 6 people, but he had such a tragic childhood. And I'm like, bite me, tragic childhood. Everybody has a tragic childhood. Every childhood could be taken tragically, you know. Some are worse than others. I fully admit that. Like, but also that's not an excuse for doing the evil thing. To get me to care about the bad guy, like,
That's pretty big though.
it's
Yeah.
pretty, yeah, like getting me to care about all the characters, you're a good writer. That's just whether you wrote one book or 8,000 books.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I care about these characters. I care about each of them. I kind of want to know what's going on with Boo's brother. Like, you know, like
Yeah.
I care about all of them. So anyway.
I agree. I agree. I think it's just it's a really good story, and it's just really well put together. And as much as I don't want to see another movie made of it, there's a part of me that does because of all the stuff that we miss from the book.
Right. I
That
feel like even the black and white hails back to remembering an older time. Like it feels like 1935 or whatever. Like,
yeah. Mm-hmm. So I
yeah,
think some things really shouldn't be remade, and I'm somewhat glad that they never did.
yeah.
That
I would be happy with a mini series that is clearly different in kind and could include everything.
yeah.
It was a masterwork. I feel like that was a masterwork of its time, and it holds up today. And if you're going to remake it, you need to make it different and purposeful. Do the modern stuff, but hold true to the story and put every element of the book into your mini series or whatever, and make it different in kind of like when we were talking about Pride and Prejudice. The movie was great.
Mm-hmm.
The mini series was excellent because it had every element from the book, and it was different in kind from the single movie.
Yeah.
I would watch that. Like I'm down for that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, my general takeaway, this book is excellent. You will get something different out of it. Even if you have read it before, go back and read it. You will get more out of it, or you will be reminded of things that you've forgotten.
Yeah.
And the movie was about as good as you're going to make a movie about this book, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah, short of making a miniseries, that's about the best you're gonna get.
Yeah.
And I agree because I read it as a child or a preteen. It's definitely different reading it as a grown up, especially if
Yeah.
you read a different version. But I think I do appreciate it more as a grown up, and I appreciate Atticus more because I am a parent now. And like imagining having to raise your kids in that time and in that climate, in that situation. And you just have to admire him
Mm-hmm.
for wanting to do something that no one else wanted him to do. And,
Yeah.
really wanted him to do a very good job at it. And what's sad is that in the story, it becomes very clear that clearly this man did not do this thing. And there's
Right.
not even evidence that it even happened. And I
Right.
love how he keeps pointing, like, you didn't go get a doctor?
Right.
Oh, I knew who did it. It's like, that's not the point. Your daughter was attacked.
Right.
And
If your daughter is raped, you get a doctor.
yeah, she was
I don't,
physically attacked in any way. You're going to get her to a doctor and make sure she's okay. If she's
right.
raped, you need to get her help because that's also quite a physical assault.
Right.
She needs medical attention. So the fact that you didn't take her to a doctor says that nothing happened. It says that either you don't care about your daughter or you're making this crap up for both. And then, pointing out the fact that he's can't even use the hand that he most likely would have had to have used
Right.
to beat her up in the first place. He's got
Because
one hand.
you're not gonna hit her like this.
Yeah. And like he's choking her with one hand.
Right.
And she's a fully capable young woman. She can't get away from like
When she says she's kicking and hollering and making a commotion.
yeah.
If I've got one hand, even if I'm stronger than you and bigger than you, but I've got one hand to hold you down while you're kicking and hollering and making a fuss, and I rape you, how does that even?
Yeah, that would be impossible.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. Not
Especially if she's getting beat up in the process.
yeah. And
Not just choked, but black eye and,
yeah, so I don't know, the whole thing doesn't make sense. And then he proves it quite clearly. And you're like, and like you really feel like what Jem's feeling when he's getting all excited about what's going on because
right.
he's kind of been playing with the idea of becoming a lawyer someday, like his dad. And like he didn't really care, or he kind of cared. Then this case got him excited about it, kind of like,
Right.
oh yeah, this is really cool. I can help people, and it's this exciting.
Right.
And like you really feel for him when he's like, yeah, we won, we got it, we got him. And then they pronounce him guilty, and like just how devastated he is about it. Like, how?
Yeah, well, and the adults, I kind of liked seeing this dynamic that I missed. Again, another thing that I missed before. But I always kind of felt like it was like Atticus and his children against the world, right?
Yeah.
At least against the South. But Aunt Alexandria breaks down. She is very torn up about this whole thing, and she breaks down when she finds out about Tom. Maudie is very upset and also kind of has not quite a breakdown, but she's rattled when she finds out about Tom. The judge specifically called, like they talk about this, the judge specifically called Atticus to do this, even though they would normally have used the new guy to be the public defender.
Yeah.
But he's like, no, this case and this man deserves our best. Atticus, please take this on. And Atticus was like, 100%. So there, it wasn't just Atticus. Like there are other people who are like, we live in the world we live in. Also, we recognize that this is wrong.
We need to make a change. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that. I love, there's just a lot of great things about this book and the story. And I'm glad you picked it. I mean, I didn't know I needed to read this again. So thank you.
There you go.
All right. So it's my turn to pick. And I give this a lot of thought. I'm kidding. I just barely came up with this. I would like to do The Talented Mr. Ripley, which is by Patricia Highsmith. I have never read the book, but I really loved the movie. So I'm all for that if you are.
Cool. Yeah. I'm happy with that.
Okay. Yeah. So intrigue and thriller and so forth. And yeah, that'll be fun. So yeah,
Cool.
is there anything you want to add before we sign off on To Kill a Mockingbird?
I don't think so. I think we're pretty good. As people watch or listen to this, I don't know if they actually like read the next book. I know my kids sometimes do, but I love that the opportunity to like, this has given me the opportunity to read books that I might not ever have read. Like The Talented Mr. Ripley is one of them that I might never have necessarily read it.
Yeah.
But for this, I'm like, yeah, let's do this. So
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
kind of cool. I kind of,
It's been interesting. And I
yeah,
used to read again. Not that I really needed it. I just got out of the habit because they had kids. And I was just like, I don't have the chance. Or they're going to steal my bookmark because they're pugs. And
yep.
part of why I got into audiobooks. But yeah, it's been fun having a reason to read different things, especially since I know I'll generally tend to stick with the fantasy and the urban fantasy genre. So to kind of shake the dust and get out of my comfort zone. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, it's cool.
Right. Great. So yeah, I'm Ruth Craddock and
I'm Rae Davidson.
thanks for joining us for another Paperback Books, and we will see you next time when we talk about The Talented Miss Ripley.